From Olympic stages watched by millions to live broadcasts that turned from celebration to horror in an instant, winter sports have witnessed tragedies that stunned the world. These weren't just accidents. They were moments that reshaped safety rules, ended careers, and left audiences in silence. Today, we're diving into the 5 worst winter sports deaths in TV history, the chilling stories behind the moments that shocked the world. Snowboarding has always lived on the edge. Speed against gravity, athlete against mountain, skill against nature. But on January 13, 2026, that balance shattered in the Swiss Alps, and the sport lost one of its pioneers. Kestenholz wasn't just another rider carving through fresh powder. He was history. A man who stood on the Olympic podium when snowboarding made its debut at the 1998 Winter Games in Nagano, 1998 Winter Olympics, claiming bronze in giant slalom and helping introduce the world to a new era of competition. He went on to compete in multiple Olympic Games, captured 2 gold medals at the Winter X Games in snowboard cross, and built a reputation as one of Switzerland's most fearless athletes. After stepping away from the World Cup circuit following the Turin 2006 Winter Olympics, he didn't slow down. He pushed further into the extremes, becoming a pioneer of speed riding and freeride snowboarding. He was 50 years old in January 2026, experienced, calculated, a man who knew the mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. That's what makes what happened next so haunting. Kestenholz was riding in the Lötschental Valley in Switzerland's Valais Canton, high on the eastern slope of Hochschries, at around 2,400 meters above sea level. The air was thin. The snow looked pristine. He was with a friend, just another day chasing freedom in the Alps. Then, without warning, the mountain moved. An avalanche broke loose. In seconds, tons of snow roared down the slope. There was no time to outrun it, no time to fight it. The same terrain that had given him a lifetime of triumph suddenly became a crushing, unstoppable force. He was buried beneath the snow. His friend, who had been skiing alongside him, managed to save himself and immediately tried to help. Rescue teams were called. Helicopters cut through the cold alpine air. Kestenholz was pulled from beneath the avalanche and airlifted first to Visp, then to a hospital in Zion. For a moment, there was hope, but the injuries were too severe. On January 11, 2026, Kestenholz was pronounced dead at Spittal Sion. He was 50 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the snowboarding world. This wasn't just an athlete. This was one of the first Olympic medalists in the sport's history. The man who had stood on the podium in Nagano when snowboarding fought for legitimacy. The rider who had racked up 14 World Cup victories. The 2-time X Games champion. The adventurer who later soared off peaks, paraglided onto frozen lakes near St. Moritz, and even completed the first speed-riding descent of the Matterhorn, a feat few would dare attempt. And maybe that's what makes this loss hit even harder. Kestenholz built a life around chasing nature's most powerful elements. He embraced the risk. He respected it. In one of his recent social media posts, he wrote about being ready to drop everything and go when nature's wonders align. That was who he was, always ready for the next horizon. But mountains don't care about medals. They don't remember podium finishes or Olympic history. They don't pause for legends. Avalanches remain one of the most unpredictable and deadly dangers in freeride snowboarding, even for experts, even for pioneers, even for someone who had spent decades mastering the terrain. The Swiss Ski Federation expressed devastation. Teammates, fans, and fellow riders shared tributes, remembering not only his achievements but his spirit, adventurous, fearless, endlessly curious. He wasn't just competing against other athletes. He was constantly exploring what was possible when human courage met raw alpine power. And now, the same snow that once carried him to Olympic glory became the final chapter of his story. For those who grew up watching snowboarding explode onto the global stage in 1998, Kestenholz represented the beginning. For younger riders, he was proof that life after competition could still be extraordinary. For the freeride community, he was one of its architects. His death is a stark reminder of something winter sports fans often forget while watching breathtaking runs on television. Behind every smooth descent is a mountain that can turn deadly without warning. The beauty of winter sports is inseparable from the danger. That's what draws athletes to it. That's what draws us to watch. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, that danger wins.
Mom Donnie just announced that the city still remains in code blue and that 16 New Yorkers have died from the cold. Mom Donnie says in 13 of the cases, hypothermia played a role.
By the time February arrived, New York City was no longer just cold. It was locked in a relentless freeze. The snow from earlier storms had hardened into gray, jagged banks along sidewalks. Every street corner seemed sharper, every alley darker. Icy wind tunneled through avenues, carving through gaps between buildings like a silent blade. Street signs rattled in the gusts, and even the hum of traffic felt muffled, swallowed by the cold. Footsteps crunched across frozen puddles, the sound harsh against the city's usual rhythm. Nightfall brought no relief. Temperatures plunged into the teens, with wind chills that made skin sting even through layers. The city's familiar soundtrack, taxi horns, subway rumble, late-night chatter, felt muted under the weight of the freeze. Somewhere, unseen, the cold was doing its work. Then the numbers began to surface. By early February 2026, the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner confirmed 16 outdoor deaths during the prolonged cold snap. The cases spanned multiple boroughs, from Manhattan's bustling sidewalks to Brooklyn's narrow side streets, from Queens transit corridors to quiet stretches of the Bronx and Staten Island. Many deaths were directly linked to hypothermia. In others, it was a silent contributing factor, working alongside exhaustion, age, or underlying health conditions. What made this stretch especially terrifying wasn't just the snowfall, it was the duration. The freeze did not ease. Day after day, the temperature refused to rise above danger. Night after night, the cold deepened. Every hour spent outdoors became more perilous than the last, and every evening a test of human endurance. First responders described finding victims in places New Yorkers pass every day without a second thought, near subway entrances, beneath scaffolding, outside shuttered storefronts, along park pathways. Some appeared to have been seeking shelter from the wind. Others may have been disoriented, wandering aimlessly, overcome by the creeping effects of exposure. Hypothermia doesn't strike like lightning. It moves quietly. Shivering is the first warning, a desperate tremor of a failing system. Judgment falters. Confusion sets in, muscles weaken. In severe cases, victims can become paradoxically calm, even removing clothing as their body misfires, unaware that organs are shutting down. By the time someone notices, the window for survival is razor thin. During this deep freeze, emergency code blue measures were deployed across the city. Warming centers opened in schools, community centers and churches. Outreach teams combed parks, subway entrances and streets. Volunteers carried blankets, hot drinks and words of encouragement. But the cold did not yield. It did not discriminate by borough. It did not pause for daylight. It did not care how close help might have been. 16 lives ended not in dramatic blizzard rescues or headline-grabbing catastrophes, but in stillness, in silence, in the kind of freezing darkness that creeps across the city after midnight, curling into alleys, under benches, along fire escapes, and inside the hollow hum of subway grates. In a city defined by motion, energy, and noise, February 2026 revealed a different kind of predator. A winter that didn't roar. It waited, and it claimed lives quietly, with a precision that was almost invisible, almost undetectable. A chilling reminder that, in New York City, survival can hinge not on ambition, opportunity, or strength, but on sheer luck against a force as silent as it is unstoppable.
Over.
Yeah, I'm ready, in position.
Dropping in 5.
Snowboarding is a sport built on speed, precision, and daring, but even the most skilled athletes are never immune to its dangers. On the morning of March 12, 2006, the adrenaline-fueled thrill of the sport turned deadly for 26-year-old Jonathan Johansson, a rising star from Sweden who had recently competed at the Winter Olympics in Turin. Johansson had been training on Whiteface Mountain in Lake Placid, New York. preparing for an International Ski Federation World Cup snowboard cross event. The course, known as the Boreen Trail, was designed with jumps and obstacles to test the limits of even the most experienced riders. Johansson, who had been competing at the World Cup level since 2000 and was ranked 45th in the world, approached one of the jumps alone, his focus sharp, his body ready for the split-second precision that the sport demanded. But in an instant, everything went wrong. He launched into the air, his trajectory perfect for a fraction of a second. But then, mid-flight, he lost balance. His body twisted, his landing miscalculated. He slammed onto the icy surface with catastrophic force. The impact shattered his femur and ribs, tore his aorta, punctured his lung and heart. Rescue teams arrived immediately, rushing him to Adirondack Medical Center. Surgeons fought to save him, but the injuries were insurmountable. Within hours, the young athlete who had chased Olympic glory his entire life was pronounced dead. Officials confirmed that Johansson had remained within the course boundaries, wearing a helmet, and had struck no external obstacles like trees or poles. It was a tragic reminder that in snowboard cross, the danger isn't just in obstacles, it's in the physics of the sport itself. The speed, the jumps, the razor-thin margins for error. The news sent shockwaves through the snowboarding community. Johansson had just returned from Turin, where he finished 12th in snowboard cross and was considered one of Sweden's most promising snowboarders. The World Cup event at Whiteface was immediately cancelled in his honor. Teammates, competitors, and fans struggled to process the sudden loss of a man whose life revolved around chasing the thrill of the mountains. For those who watched him ride, Johansson embodied the essence of snowboarding. Fearless, ambitious, and constantly pushing the limits. But that same daring spirit, so central to his life and career, made the fall all the more tragic. In the end, it was a reminder that in winter sports, glory and danger often exist on the same slope, and sometimes the mountain demands the ultimate price. On the night of January 7th, 2022, Murree didn't look like a disaster zone. It looked like a postcard. Families from across Pakistan had driven for hours to see the snow fall over the pine-covered hills of the beloved hill station in Punjab. For many, it was a dream moment. Children pressing their faces to car windows, couples taking selfies as flakes drifted down, engines humming in long lines of traffic that seemed almost festive. But within hours, that dream turned into a frozen nightmare. The snowfall that began earlier in the week had already drawn massive crowds. Warnings had been issued about heavy snow between January 6th and 9. Advisories suggested checking weather and traffic updates before traveling. Still, the roads filled. More than 157,000 vehicles entered Murree as the blizzard intensified. Bumper-to-bumper traffic choked every main artery in and out of town. And then the storm escalated. 4 feet of snow fell. Temperatures plunged to -8 degrees Celsius. The same snow that had looked magical in Instagram stories began swallowing cars whole. Exhaust pipes disappeared under thick drifts. Windshield wipers froze mid-swipe. Engines idled for warmth as families realized they weren't moving anywhere. Some tourists tried to abandon their vehicles and walk to nearby hotels, but even that added to the chaos. Cars left at odd angles narrowed already congested roads. In some areas, more than 13,000 vehicles were crammed onto routes designed for only 4,000. Trees snapped under the weight of snow and crashed onto vehicles. Roads became impassable. Hotels, overwhelmed and in some cases accused of exploiting the crisis, reportedly raised room prices dramatically. Rooms that once cost a few thousand rupees were allegedly being offered for tens of thousands. A simple cup of tea that normally cost Rs40 was being sold for hundreds. Many families, unable to afford shelter, made the devastating decision to stay inside their cars overnight. That decision would cost lives. As snow blocked exhaust pipes, carbon monoxide quietly seeped into sealed vehicles. Hypothermia set in as fuel ran low. Children cried themselves to sleep in freezing back seats. Phones lost signal. Gas cylinders ran out. Food supplies dwindled. By morning, rescue teams were facing a catastrophe. 23 people would ultimately die. When footage began circulating on social media, the brutality of the situation became undeniable. Cars were buried so deeply that only side mirrors were visible above the snow. Rescue workers struggled through waist-high drifts. Soldiers moved vehicle to vehicle, knocking on frozen windows, searching for signs of life. On Friday night, authorities finally banned further traffic into Murree. By Saturday, military forces were deployed. Infantry platoons from the Pakistan Army, Frontier Corps, and Rangers joined the operation. Over 700 vehicles were pulled from the snow. Stranded tourists were taken to military-run relief camps, where they received warm food, medication, and blankets. But for 23 families, the help had come too late. Electricity failed in many areas. Water pipes froze. Residents themselves faced shortages of drinking water. Mobile service was patchy. Even as engineers worked to clear the Murree Expressway and reopen roads, the storm's impact lingered. Roads remained closed. The town that had welcomed tourists with open arms was now silent under a heavy, suffocating white blanket. The tragedy sparked outrage across Pakistan. The Prime Minister ordered an inquiry, and that's what makes the Murree snowstorm so haunting. It wasn't a remote mountain expedition gone wrong. It wasn't a handful of adventurers taking extreme risks. It was ordinary families, parents, children, friends, people who simply wanted to see snowfall. They drove into what they thought would be a winter wonderland. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a blizzard, in stationary cars that slowly turned into ice-cold chambers. Some died from the cold, some from invisible fumes, all within sight of other stranded vehicles, in a town filled with thousands of others just meters away. In Murree, it happened in a single night, and the silence left behind was colder than the storm itself.
New York ended 1947 with the greatest fall of snow it's ever seen, over 25 inches in about 16 hours.
It arrived without warning. On the night of December 25, 1947, as families across New York City lingered over dinner tables and beneath Christmas trees, snow began to fall. At first, it seemed harmless, almost picturesque, a holiday touch that complemented twinkling lights and the scent of pine. But by midnight, the snowfall had thickened, relentless. By morning, the city was vanishing beneath it. More than 2 feet of snow blanketed New York in less than 24 hours. In some areas, drifts climbed beyond 10 feet, swallowing cars whole, blocking doorways, and sealing neighborhoods in eerie silence. Streets disappeared beneath the white weight. Elevated trains froze in place, their iron rails coated in ice. Buses stalled where they stood, passengers trapped inside as exhaust fumes mingled with the frigid air. Thousands of commuters were stranded overnight, some stuck in subway cars and rail stations with little heat, breathing in the cold and uncertainty. What made the storm especially terrifying was its suddenness. Forecasting in 1947 lacked satellites, radar grids, and smartphone alerts. There were no modern tracking models. The city went to bed on Christmas thinking winter had been mild, believing the worst had not yet arrived, and awoke buried under a blinding white. Emergency crews struggled to move. Snowplows were overwhelmed. Fire trucks crawled through impassable streets. Ambulances faced delays, fighting through drifts just to reach hospitals. For days, New York was effectively frozen in place. The normal rhythm of the city halted, replaced by an oppressive stillness, and the cold followed close behind. Across the greater Northeast, the blizzard was linked to 77 deaths, including several in New York City. Many were victims of exposure or heart attacks triggered by shoveling. Others succumbed to accidents in the chaos, vehicles stranded in deep snow, people slipping on hidden ice, or trapped in unheated homes. Some collapsed while clearing paths for neighbors. Others never made it home. Families awoke to find doors blocked, cars buried, and lives quietly lost amid the drifts. The silence after the storm was haunting. Manhattan's avenues, usually alive with taxis, buses, and hurried footsteps, had become white corridors. Children played atop snow mounds that hid buried automobiles, their laughter a fragile contrast to the unseen tragedies beneath. Amid the surreal winter beauty, grief and fear lingered quietly in homes across the city. The blizzard of 1947 forced New York to rethink snow removal entirely. The city implemented more aggressive plowing systems and, in an unprecedented effort, resorted to dumping massive amounts of collected snow into the Hudson River. It was a logistical feat, born of necessity, and a stark lesson in the power of sudden winter fury. But for dozens of families, Christmas 1947 would never be remembered for gifts or celebrations. It would be remembered for the night the snow didn't stop. For the city, winter had arrived, not with warning, but with a quiet, suffocating inevitability. A force that could bury streets, stall lives, and claim them, silently, beneath the whiteness.
16 of our fellow New Yorkers have passed away outside during this brutal stretch of cold. In 13 of these cases, preliminary findings indicate that hypothermia played a role, and 3 of these deaths appear to be overdose deaths.
The snow started as it always does in New York, soft, almost beautiful, drifting lazily from a steel gray sky, coating the streets in a deceptive quiet. Children laughed in Central Park as flakes settled on their scarves. Tourists raised cameras, capturing the magic of a city that seemed, just for a moment, suspended in white. By nightfall, it was something else entirely. Winter storm fern didn't just arrive, it invaded. The Arctic front behind it dropped temperatures into the teens. Wind gusts ripped through canyons of glass and steel, tearing at coats, scarves, and the thin skin of anyone caught unprepared. Snow hardened into ice, frosting sidewalks into treacherous runways. Streets that usually hummed with taxis, deliveries, and late-night commuters became slick, quiet, and dangerous. Even the city's neon glow felt muted under the oppressive white haze. Then the calls began. Dispatchers' voices cracked over radio channels. Officers on patrol found bodies slumped against lampposts. EMS crews discovered unconscious individuals sprawled on benches, leaning against brick walls, pressed into doorways, or hiding in the shadow of scaffolding. In Brooklyn, in Queens, in Manhattan, across all 5 boroughs. Some victims had tried to survive in the only way they knew how, curling into alleyways, wrapping themselves in thin blankets, seeking refuge near subway grates that barely emitted heat. Others had simply misjudged the cold, thinking they could endure a few hours outside. But the Arctic wind didn't negotiate. Over the course of the storm and the unrelenting freeze that followed, at least 15 people were confirmed dead from hypothermia or cold-related exposure. Many were discovered in the pre-dawn hours, when temperatures bottomed out, and the wind cut through even the thickest layers of clothing. Hypothermia doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself with drama. It is a slow, invisible predator. First comes the shivering, then confusion, slurred speech, odd behavior. Some victims experience paradoxical undressing, shedding clothing in a deadly illusion of warmth as their bodies' systems shut down. When stillness finally comes, rescue is often too late. In one Queens courtyard, a 67-year-old man was found curled into himself, a thin coat no match for the wind that sliced through the brick maze of surrounding buildings. In Brooklyn, a young woman with schizophrenia had wandered from her shelter, seeking warmth near a subway grate, only to collapse on the icy pavement, unseen for hours. In Manhattan's Lower East Side, a homeless couple huddled together under a tarp, only to be discovered the next morning, lifeless, their bodies stiff as the ice around them. What made Winter Storm Fern especially terrifying was not just its severity, but its duration. The snow didn't melt, the cold didn't break. Day after day, the city remained locked in sub-freezing temperatures, turning each night into a survival test. Emergency Code Blue protocols were activated citywide. Warming centers opened in schools and community centers. Outreach teams fanned out through parks, underpasses, and train stations. Volunteers carried hot drinks and blankets, but even the best efforts could not reach everyone. Some victims were elderly, some were homeless, some battled mental health issues, others simply underestimated the lethal power of a city frozen in place. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all, this wasn't a remote mountain tragedy. It wasn't a wilderness expedition gone wrong. This happened beneath the towers and traffic lights of one of the densest, most alive cities in the world. Bodies were found under flickering neon signs, beside rumbling subway entrances, just steps away from apartment windows where lights stayed on, oblivious to the death creeping below. The snow fell quietly. The city moved on. But for at least 15 people, Winter Storm Fern and the unyielding deep freeze became a silent, freezing end. A reminder that in New York City, winter is not just inconvenient, it can be deadly. And the storm left an imprint, not just in the snowdrifts piled along Fifth Avenue or the frozen puddles of Times Square, but in the whispered warnings carried in the icy wind. Even in the city that never sleeps, nature can strike without notice, and survival is never guaranteed.
At least 9 members of a family were killed in Chitral after a snow avalanche buried their house as heavy snowfall, avalanches, and landslides disrupted life across northern Pakistan.
For days, the snow did not stop. It fell quietly at first over the mountains of Neelam Valley in Azad, Kashmir. Thick, steady, almost beautiful. Villages nestled between steep slopes disappeared under layers of white. Roads narrowed, power flickered, communication lines weakened. But for many residents, heavy snowfall in January is not unusual. Winter here is always harsh. This time was different. By January 16, 2020, the snow had grown dangerously deep. The mountains above the villages were heavy, overloaded, unstable. And then, without warning, they broke. A thunderous roar ripped through the valley as massive slabs of snow and ice tore down the mountainsides. Entire homes were swallowed in seconds. Walls collapsed. Roofs caved in. Families inside had no time to run. At least 74 people were killed. Dozens more were injured. And as hours passed, the death toll threatened to climb higher, with fears that many were still trapped beneath the frozen debris. Entire clusters of homes vanished. More than 80 houses and shops were completely destroyed. Dozens more were left partially damaged. Vehicles were crushed. A mosque was damaged. What had been a functioning community the day before became a landscape of flattened structures buried under meters of snow. The most haunting part? Many of the victims were inside their homes when the avalanches struck. In the immediate aftermath, there were no dramatic rescue machines carving clean paths through the snow. There were villagers, desperate, breath visible in the freezing air, digging with shovels with their hands, with anything they could find. Neighbors searching for neighbors. Parents screaming names into a silent white wasteland. Footage and photographs from those days show scenes that are almost surreal. Rescue workers waist deep in snow. Helicopters hovering low over isolated rooftops barely visible above the drifts. Soldiers forming lines to dig through compacted ice, racing against time and temperature. A state of emergency was declared. Helicopters flew search and rescue missions for 3 days, airlifting the injured to Muzaffarabad for treatment. Supplies were dropped into areas cut off by blocked roads, but even reaching some villages was nearly impossible. The snow had sealed them in. What makes this tragedy especially chilling is that it came during one of the harshest winters in nearly 2 decades. Authorities noted that while snowfall is normal for the region, the intensity of the cold this year was far worse, some attributing it to shifting climate patterns. Roads across Pakistan-administered Kashmir were blocked. Electricity was disrupted. Communication networks went down. Life, as residents knew it, froze. And the avalanches didn't just destroy buildings. They shattered the sense of security that comes from being inside your own home.
Kazimierz K. Skrzypecki, a Polish-born luger competing for Great Britain, was making a training run on a brand-new Olympic course that looked more like a concrete waterslide with straw bales than a purpose-built venue.
In January 1964, the mountains overlooking Innsbruck were buzzing with Olympic excitement. The 1964 Winter Olympics were about to begin, and for the first time ever, luge would appear on the Olympic program. Athletes from around the world gathered at the icy track in Igles, eager to be part of history. Among them stood an unlikely competitor, 58-year-old Kazimierz K. Skrzypecki. He was not a young winter prodigy raised on alpine slopes. His journey to the Olympics had been anything but conventional. Born in Eastern Europe, trained as an architect, and shaped by the turmoil of World War II, he had served as a Royal Air Force officer with Polish squadrons in Britain. By the early 1960s, he had taken up luge, a fast, dangerous sport that was still finding its place internationally. Against the odds, he earned selection to represent Great Britain at the Games. It was an extraordinary achievement. Luge was making its Olympic debut, and the British program itself was still developing. Yet, K. Skrzypecki stood at the start line on equal terms with competitors decades younger. Age had not dimmed his ambition. He carried himself with quiet determination. driven by the same Olympic dream that fuels every athlete. On January 21st, just days before the opening ceremony, he took to the Eagles track for a training run. The course was brutally fast, a narrow, twisting channel of ice bordered by rigid walls and unforgiving curves. There were no roaring crowds that day, no medals to be won, only the sharp scrape of steel runners on ice and the intense focus of athletes testing their limits. Somewhere along the descent, disaster struck. The exact sequence of events was never fully clarified, but at high speed he lost control. His sled smashed violently into the side of the chute. The force of the impact was catastrophic. He suffered a fractured skull, a broken pelvis, and multiple severe injuries. Rescue teams responded immediately, rushing him to a hospital in Innsbruck. Surgeons worked through the night in a desperate attempt to save him, but the injuries were overwhelming. The following day, during emergency surgery, his heart failed. A man who had survived the chaos of war and rebuilt his life across borders had lost his life on an Olympic training track. The news stunned the Olympic community. Luge was meant to be celebrating its historic debut at the Games. Instead, before competition had even officially begun, it had already been marked by tragedy. For the British team, the loss cut deeply. They had not only lost a teammate, they had lost a symbol of perseverance, a man who proved that determination does not fade with age. His wife and brother traveled to Austria to bring him home. At their request, his body was returned to Poland, where he was laid to rest, a final journey that reflected the many chapters of his remarkable life. Only days later, another fatal accident would occur on the Olympic slopes, deepening the sorrow surrounding those games. When the opening ceremony finally took place on January 29th, celebration was overshadowed by grief. A minute of silence honored the men who had lost their lives, a solemn reminder that behind the grandeur of the Olympics stand real people, real risks, and sometimes irreversible consequences. By February 1969, winter had already worn down the Northeast. Streets were hardened with ice, sidewalks were cracked from repeated freezes, the air carried a biting edge that gnawed at exposed skin. And then the nor'easter arrived, and it did not come quietly. The storm intensified rapidly off the Atlantic coast, drawing warm ocean moisture into the Arctic air mass, and then dumping it inland. Snow fell in sheets, relentless and unyielding. Winds whipped through the city, carving blinding tunnels of white through the streets. In New York City, more than 2 feet of snow piled atop sidewalks and streets, burying cars, grounding flights, and turning highways into frozen parking lots. Visibility dropped to near zero at times, the world outside reduced to a wall of snow. But the most terrifying scenes were not from the air. They unfolded on the ground. Motorists attempting to outrun the storm became trapped. Cars slid into ditches, engines stalled, and doors froze shut. Some vehicles were abandoned mid-highway, their occupants huddled together for warmth, waiting for rescue that could not come fast enough. Others became coffins of steel and glass as temperatures plummeted and exhaust fumes mixed with the frigid air. Emergency crews fought through drifts and ice, battling a storm that seemed determined to consume everything in its path. Air travel was paralyzed. Trains were delayed or immobilized. Emergency services were stretched to their limits. Power lines fell beneath the snow's weight, leaving homes dark as temperatures continued to fall. Elderly residents and families without reliable heat faced a slow, creeping danger, one measured not in minutes but in hours of exposure. Across the mid-Atlantic and New England, the storm was linked to at least 94 deaths. Many resulted from exposure, vehicle accidents on slick roads, and heart attacks triggered by strenuous snow removal. In and around New York City, the combination of heavy snowfall and Arctic cold proved particularly lethal. The city's density, its crowded streets and bustling avenues, became a hazard rather than a convenience when mobility itself was immobilized. What made the February 1969 nor'easter especially brutal was its scale. This wasn't a neighborhood trapped for a night. It was an entire corridor of states locked down simultaneously. Interstate highways became lifelines cut off by drifting snow. Rural communities were isolated. Urban centers were overwhelmed. The storm's reach was measured not in blocks, but in hundreds of miles. Photographs from the aftermath show a city under siege, cars nearly buried, rooftops sagging beneath the weight of snow, streets lined with abandoned vehicles, and long lines of stranded travelers waiting for buses or trains that would not arrive for days. Sidewalks were ghostly corridors, the usual hum of footsteps replaced by the crunch of snow under solitary boots. For many, the storm was remembered as a logistical nightmare. For nearly 100 families, it was something far worse. The February 1969 nor'easter stands as one of the deadliest winter storms of its era, a chilling reminder that when snow, wind, and Arctic cold converge, the consequences are swift, widespread, and unforgiving. And in a city and region that prided itself on resilience, it left a quiet, lingering fear. Even in the places we think we control, nature can strike with total immobilizing force.
Driving major multi-vehicle pileups across several states tonight as a winter storm sweeps across the Great Lakes and right into the Northeast. Dangerous travel conditions on the highways.
It starts with a single brake light glowing red in the snow, then another. Then it suddenly impacted. In the middle of a blinding winter storm in Michigan, more than 100 vehicles smashed into each other along Interstate 196, just southwest of Grand Rapids. What began as an ordinary drive through falling snow quickly spiraled into one of those terrifying chain reaction disasters that unfold in seconds and are caught in chilling detail on dashboard cameras and traffic cams. The snow wasn't just falling. It was swirling sideways, blown by fierce winds that erased the horizon. Drivers could barely see the cars in front of them, let alone anticipate what was happening beyond that thin curtain of white. Visibility dropped close to zero. The highway turned into a frozen guessing game. Pedro Mata Jr., one of the motorists caught in the chaos, later described how he could barely see anything as snow blew across the road. He managed to stop his pickup truck safely, but what haunted him wasn't what he saw. It was what he heard. The bangs, the booms, metal crunching against metal behind him. I saw what was in front of me. I couldn't see what was behind me, he said. That's the nightmare of a snowstorm pileup. You can try to control what's ahead of you, but what's coming from behind, you have no idea. Within minutes, Interstate 196 became a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered glass. More than 30 semi-trailer trucks jackknifed or slammed into smaller vehicles. Cars spun out, sliding helplessly across ice-slick lanes. Some drivers tried to swerve into the median to escape being crushed. Others had nowhere to go. The footage is visceral. Tractor trailers looming out of the white haze. Sedans crumpling like paper. Snow whipping so thickly across the camera lens that vehicles seem to materialize out of nowhere before impact. It's the kind of chaos where you don't even have time to react, only brace. Michigan State Police were forced to shut down both directions of the interstate as emergency crews struggled to reach victims in treacherous conditions. Rescuers navigated a frozen obstacle course of wrecked vehicles, checking each one for injuries. Miraculously, while there were numerous injuries, none were believed to be fatal. But survival doesn't erase the terror. This wasn't an isolated event. The pileup was just one violent episode in a massive winter system sweeping across the United States. The National Weather Service issued warnings spanning from northern Minnesota down through Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. Temperatures were expected to plummet to minus 22 degrees Celsius with wind chill, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. And that's what makes these snowstorm pileups so brutal. It's not recklessness. It's not high-speed racing. It's ordinary people driving cautiously, families heading home, truckers on delivery routes, workers commuting, suddenly trapped in a whiteout where nature strips away every margin for error. You don't see the danger building. You don't hear it approaching over the howl of wind until it's too late. 1 second you're moving. The next, your world jolts violently as another vehicle slams into you. Then another and another. A chain reaction powered by ice, momentum, and zero visibility.
least 17 people have been reported dead in the wake of Winter Storm Jonas. Most of the deaths were caused by traffic accidents. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced a travel ban Saturday for New York City. Roads, above-ground subway systems, buses, and railway lines closed for the storm.
When Winter Storm Jonas roared into New York City in January 2016, it didn't just snow, it buried the city. Nearly 28 inches fell in the Central Park, setting a record at the time and transforming familiar streets into white canyons. Cars disappeared beneath drifts. Streetlights jutted from mounds of snow like lonely sentinels. Entire avenues fell silent. Public transit ground to a halt. Highways, normally clogged with ceaseless traffic, lay empty under the weight of frozen white. The city looked frozen in a photograph, immaculate yet ominous. But once the storm clouds passed, the real danger began. As the sun rose over a city entombed in snow, residents emerged with shovels in hand. Sidewalks needed clearing. Cars had to be unearthed. Entrances were blocked. The snow was thick, wet, and unyielding. The kind that clings to a shovel, resists every lift, and presses down on shoulders, back, and chest. For some, that effort proved fatal. In the days following the storm, at least 5 people in the NYC area died from heart attacks or medical emergencies triggered while shoveling snow. 2 fatalities occurred in Queens, 2 in other boroughs, and 1 in Staten Island. What seemed like a routine winter chore, a task of civic responsibility and personal safety, became a deadly strain on the body. Shoveling snow is deceptively dangerous. The cold constricts blood vessels, forcing the heart to work harder. The lifting, twisting, and repetitive motion spikes heart rate and blood pressure. For individuals with underlying cardiac conditions, some diagnosed, some not, the combination can be lethal. Witnesses described chilling scenes. One man was found slumped over his partially cleared driveway, the shovel still clutched in his hands. Another collapsed mid-lift, neighbors rushing to dial 911 as snow clung to his coat. Others were taken to hospitals, emergency rooms filled with frostbitten, exhausted, and overexerted bodies, but could not be revived. The storm itself had passed, but its weight, literal, physiological, and unforgiving, lingered. That's what made Winter Storm Jonas so unnerving. The headlines focused on record-breaking totals, viral images of empty Times Square buried in snow, and the awe-inspiring power of the blizzard. But the true horror unfolded quietly on residential blocks, along driveways and sidewalks where people were simply trying to reclaim normal life. No dramatic rescues, no collapsing buildings, no breaking news footage, just a shovel, a heartbeat, and snow too heavy to lift. Winter Storm Jonas proved that in New York City, the deadliest moment of a snowstorm isn't always when it's falling. Sometimes it's the morning after, and sometimes survival is as fragile as the thin layer of ice that forms on the shovel's handle in the freezing dawn.
All'alba la giovane sciatrice appena 19enne non ce l'ha fatta. La rovinosa caduta ieri durante un allenamento non ha dato scampo neanche a lei.
The mountains of South Tyrol had long been a playground for young athletes chasing speed, precision, and glory. But on October 28, 2024, the frozen slopes of the Snowstorm Glacier became the site of a tragedy that shook the winter sports world. 19-year-old Matilda Lorenzi, a rising star in alpine skiing, was taking a routine high-speed training run down the Grauend G1 slope when the unthinkable happened. Matilda had grown up with skis on her feet, racing alongside her older sister Lucrezia, herself a World Cup competitor. The sisters had honed their skills at Sestriere, moving there with their family to chase their dreams. By 2024, Matilda had already claimed national titles in both the elite and junior categories, secured top 10 finishes at the Junior World Championships, and proved herself on the Europa Cup circuit. She was widely regarded as one of Italy's brightest young talents, a skier whose future seemed limitless. That morning, she launched into the icy run with the focus and determination that had brought her this far. But in the blink of an eye, control was lost. Her skis slipped. Her trajectory went wrong. She was thrown violently from the slope, slamming into the unforgiving ice. Rescue teams raced to her side, airlifting her to the hospital in Bolzano. Surgeons fought desperately, but the injuries were too severe. By the night, Matilda Lorenzi had passed away. News of her death rippled through the skiing community like a shockwave. Fellow athletes, coaches, and fans mourned the loss of someone so young, so talented, and so full of promise. Tributes poured in from around the world, including from Michaela Schifrin, who honored Matilda with heartfelt messages across social media. Italian authorities launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the crash, probing potential safety lapses. But for those who loved her, no inquiry could undo the grief. Her older sister Lucretia spoke of Matilda with a mixture of sorrow and admiration, calling her a good giant whose determination and drive would continue to inspire even in her absence. The Italian Winter Sports Federation, the International Ski and Snowboard Federation, and the Italian Ministry of Defense all issued statements expressing profound condolences for the loss of an athlete whose life and career had been cut tragically short. Matilda Lorenzi's story was one of talent, ambition, and promise, a life spent racing against the clock and the mountains themselves. But on that fateful day, the mountains exacted their toll. A stark reminder that in alpine skiing, the line between triumph and tragedy is as thin and sharp as the ice beneath a skier's blades. Her funeral in Giovano and burial in Valjoie marked the end of a young life, but her legacy, the courage, skill, and passion she brought to the slopes will endure, a haunting echo across the snowy peaks she loved so dearly. The storm didn't just arrive quietly over the mountains of Afghanistan in February 2010. It roared in with a violence that no one on the Salang Pass was truly prepared for. The Salang Pass, a narrow and treacherous lifeline cutting through the towering Hindu Kush mountains north of Kabul, had always been dangerous in winter. Locals knew that avalanches were common here. Nearly 250 avalanches strike this road every year, but this time felt different. The snowfall was heavier, the wind was sharper, and the sky carried a weight that felt ominous. Then the blizzard hit. Visibility vanished almost instantly. Snow whipped across the highway leading to the Salang Tunnel, one of Afghanistan's most critical routes connecting Kabul to the north. Drivers, families, traders, truckers were already inside the tunnel or inching along the steep mountain road when the mountain itself gave way. Without warning, massive walls of snow thundered down the slopes. One avalanche, then another, and another. By the time it was over, at least 36 avalanches had ripped through the southern approach to the tunnel, burying more than 3.5 kilometers of roadway. Vehicles were crushed, shoved off cliffs, or entombed beneath meters of snow. Inside the poorly ventilated tunnel, thousands were trapped in their cars as exhaust fumes thickened the air. The cold was brutal, the darkness suffocating. Imagine sitting in your vehicle, engine running for warmth, snow piling higher against your windows, the road ahead gone, and behind you, sealed shut by tons of ice and rock. No signal, no clear escape, just the sound of distant rumbling, and the terrifying possibility that another avalanche could hit at any second. Early reports feared dozens dead. That number would rise sharply. Afghanistan's interior minister at the time warned that as many as 2,500 people could be trapped. Survivors later described cars completely buried, passengers clawing at snow with bare hands, screaming for help that couldn't immediately reach them. Some vehicles were pushed down the mountainside entirely. Others were flattened under the sheer force of sliding snow. And while rescuers fought to reach them, another silent killer crept in, carbon monoxide. With traffic stalled for hours inside the tunnel, engines idled in desperation for heat. The air turned toxic. The rescue effort was chaotic and heroic all at once. More than 500 Afghan National Army troops rushed to the scene, joined by helicopters and bulldozers. NATO forces deployed Chinook helicopters to drop food and medical supplies to those stranded. The injured were airlifted to hospitals in Charikar and Bagram airfield, but clearing the snow was painfully slow. The storm hadn't truly ended. The mountains were still unstable. By February 10th, around 2,500 people had been rescued, but many never made it out. At least 175 lives were lost in the Salang Avalanches, some crushed instantly, others suffocating beneath snow, and some succumbing to cold and toxic fumes while waiting for help that struggled to arrive in time. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is that warnings had existed. Heavy snowfall had been forecast. The structural defenses along the pass had already been weakened by previous avalanches, yet the road remained open. Critics later pointed to limited infrastructure, scarce resources, and a system unprepared for a disaster of this magnitude. In a country already strained by conflict and poverty, nature delivered a devastating blow. And the pain wasn't isolated to Salang. Across Afghanistan that winter, avalanches and flash floods killed dozens more. In provinces like Panjshir, entire homes were swallowed. Residents dug through snow with their bare hands, desperate to find relatives buried underneath. One man told reporters he had learned that 2 of his family members were dead. 8 more still trapped somewhere beneath the white silence. For many Afghans, the Salang Pass disaster became one of the deadliest avalanche events in the country's recent history. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most brutal force isn't war or politics, but nature itself. And if you watch the footage from that time, rescue crews scrambling across unstable slopes, cars barely visible under towering drifts, survivors wrapped in blankets with hollow, stunned expressions, you can feel it. The mountain didn't just collapse that day, it swallowed a highway, it trapped thousands, and it left behind a silence that still echoes through the Hindu Kush.
At the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, tragedy struck when 19-year-old Australian skier Ross Milne, despite his experience, encountered a fatal accident.
High above Innsbruck, the slopes of Pacherkofel were meant to showcase the world's finest skiers during the 1964 Winter Olympics. But before the downhill races even began, there was tension in the mountain air. That winter had delivered unusually little snow. Organizers were forced to haul in massive amounts from other areas, even calling in soldiers to help build up the course. What should have been pristine Olympic terrain felt unstable, artificial, and rushed. Among the young athletes preparing to race was 19-year-old Ross Milne. He came from Myrtleford, a small Australian town far removed from Europe's towering alpine traditions. But Ross wasn't just filling a lane on the start list. Back home, he was widely regarded as Australia's most promising downhill skier, naturally gifted, versatile, and driven. He excelled at water skiing, horse riding, and tennis. Friends described him as upbeat and composed, fearless, but never careless. He had already spent time competing in Europe, determined to prove that an Australian could stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's best. The Olympics weren't just a dream. They were his statement, a chance to put his country on the winter sports map. On the morning of January 25, 1964, Ross prepared for an official training run. The atmosphere on the course was chaotic. Nearly 100 skiers were allowed on the track at once. There was little spacing, little control, and almost no margin for error on a downhill course lined with unforgiving trees and exposed rocks. Just before 11:30 a.m., Ross pushed off. He accelerated quickly, carving through the icy surface as wind tore past his helmet. The upper section came and went in seconds. Then he approached one of the steepest and most dangerous stretches of the course, a blind rise where visibility vanished until the final moment. As he crested it, he saw them. A cluster of skiers gathered ahead, standing directly in his path. At speeds between 60 and 70 kilometers per hour, hesitation wasn't an option. He reacted instinctively, attempting to brake and steer around them. But downhill skis aren't built for sudden stops. The icy surface offered no forgiveness. His edge caught. In an instant, control was gone. Ross veered off the course and slammed violently into a tree. Further down the slope, teammates initially had no idea what had occurred. It was only when one skier climbed back up and saw him lying motionless that the magnitude of the accident became clear. He was unconscious, gravely injured. Medics rushed to his side. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation began immediately as he was carried down from the mountain. A helicopter transported him to hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic. Shortly after arrival, Ross Milne was pronounced dead. Shock rippled through the Olympic Village. Just days earlier, another athlete had died during training. Now, before the games had even properly begun, a second fatality cast a dark shadow over what was supposed to be a global celebration of sport. For Australia's small Olympic team, the grief was overwhelming. Teammates and officials gathered that afternoon for a memorial service, many reportedly in tears, struggling to comprehend how the confident young skier who had stood beside them hours earlier was suddenly gone. Back in Australia, the tragedy struck in a different way. Ross's younger brother Malcolm had arrived in Melbourne with their parents, preparing to fly to Europe to watch him compete. Instead, a knock at their hotel room door brought devastating news. The journey was canceled. The family returned home in silence. In the official aftermath, investigators concluded that Ross had caught an edge and lost control. Some officials suggested that competitors from nations without deep alpine traditions lacked the experience for such demanding courses. But those closest to him rejected that narrative. Teammates and team managers pointed to the overcrowded training run, the poor course management, and the dangerously exposed trees lining the slope. Many believed the conditions, not inexperience, played a decisive role. What was meant to be a triumphant Olympic debut became one of the game's darkest chapters, a tragedy that still lingers as a reminder of how quickly speed, pressure, and imperfect preparation can turn deadly on a mountainside. A few days before Christmas 2022, Buffalo began to disappear. Between December 21 and 26, a massive winter system exploded across North America. Meteorologists called it a once-in-a-generation storm. Rapid pressure drops created a bomb cyclone. Arctic air surged south. Winds screamed past 60 miles per hour. When that bitter air collided with the relatively warm waters of Lake Erie, it unleashed relentless lake-effect snow over Buffalo. From the morning of December 23rd through early December 25th, the city endured 37.5 consecutive hours of blizzard conditions, the longest in its history. Visibility vanished. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to white nothingness. Snow piled up faster than crews could clear it. In some areas, more than 4 feet fell, with drifts towering over vehicles. Wind gusts reached nearly 80 miles per hour. It felt less like a snowstorm and more like a hurricane made of ice. Emergency calls flooded in. Police body cam footage later showed officers pushing through knee-deep snow, leaning into violent winds, flashlights cutting through near zero visibility. Inside stranded vehicles, families waited in freezing silence, some trapped for days. Exhaust pipes clogged with snow, fuel running low, temperatures plunging. Some victims were found frozen in their cars. Others became disoriented in whiteout conditions and collapsed outdoors, only steps from safety. Many died inside homes without heat as power failures spread. At the height of the storm, emergency services were overwhelmed. For a time, help simply could not reach everyone. More than 40 people died in the Buffalo region alone. Across the United States and Canada, the storm claimed over 100 lives. The deaths weren't only from exposure. There were vehicle pileups, cardiac arrests while shoveling snow, house fires from unsafe heating, and carbon monoxide poisoning from indoor generators. Buffalo Niagara International Airport shut down for 5 days. A driving ban lasted nearly a week. Highways became impassable. Entire neighborhoods were buried. Residents compared it to the blizzard of 1977, but this one proved even deadlier. What made the 2022 Buffalo blizzard so devastating wasn't just the snowfall or wind speeds. It was how it trapped people in ordinary places, cars, sidewalks, living rooms, and turned them into survival zones. People weren't climbing mountains or crossing glaciers. They were driving home for Christmas, walking to a store, shoveling a driveway, and suddenly the world disappeared. That Christmas week, Buffalo didn't just endure a storm. It endured isolation, exhaustion, and heartbreaking loss. Because sometimes the deadliest storms don't arrive with thunder. They arrive as snow, and they bury everything.